The early star of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend isn't Friday practice pace setter Lando Norris, but he was driving Norris's McLaren. Alex Dunne, P4 on his debut for McLaren, less than a tenth away from teammate and World Championship leader Oscar Piastri. Now, Dunne could be a future McLaren F1 driver, especially if he continues on this level of potential. We rate Dunne quite highly, so Josh Sutil, how good a performance was this in FP1?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. Look, this is practice, so it's very easy to say it means nothing because there's different fuel loads, different tyre strategies, run plans. It's quite hard to draw conclusions. But when you're looking at a driver's F1 debut on a weekend like this, there are signs that there's something special there. You only got to look back at the likes of Charles Leclerc at Haas, George Russell at Force India, Lando Norris in this very same team, even Ollie Behrman in 23, that really kind of helped Haas make a decision on him. There are little things you can look at, and you can look at the headline times, and the headline time was really good, within a tenth of Piastri, but you can look at other things too. You can look at the pace progression through practice. You know, Dunne spent the first kind of 25 minutes of the session doing aero tests, not doing kind of, you know, what we call proper running. And then once he got into the proper running, the lap time progression was insane. You know, it was 1.3 seconds, it was half a second quicker, just massive lap time progression. Feedback as well, he was, you know, suggesting flap adjustments. He was looking like a driver who had been around for quite a long time, not a 19-year-old in his very first session.
The way I'd describe it is he basically got given and executed a proper FP1 program. You don't always see that. Think of when Isaac Hadjar jumped into the Red Bull for the first time and was basically told don't crash. I have a feeling that Dino Beganovic has been on something similar with Ferrari in Bahrain and here, but make no mistake, even though he was given that opportunity, Dunne did a very good job with it. And Lando Norris, who was sat on the sidelines in FP1, noticed that as well, said he'd given good feedback from FP1 and was on the pace immediately, so that was impressive. I guess the next question, Josh, is it a surprise? You know, this is a guy who was impressed in junior categories, doing very well as a rookie in Formula 2. He's highly rated within McLaren. He wouldn't be given the chance if he wasn't considered capable of doing the job in FP1, but was this even better than you expected? Has he put himself in a position where just even in an FP1 alone, you look at it and say, he's made McLaren take notice of him even more as an F1 prospect?
Well, his entire 2025 has been so impressive. You know, last year he was in Formula 3, finished outside the top 10 in the standings, and it was quite easy to kind of dismiss him. But McLaren believed in him, McLaren saw some potential there, and he has paid them back, you know, tenfold. I was speaking to Warren Hughes, who's in charge of the McLaren driver development program, and he said that, you know, he said to Alex, look, you know, try and win a race this year, try and come top 4 in F2. He's leading F2, he won 2 of the first 3 feature races. You know, he's blown all of McLaren's expectations out of the water, and I have a feeling that he's done that again today, you know, because they did have high expectations for him, but he's exceeded those. And what you said about, you know, McLaren putting the faith in him to push the car, they wouldn't do that unless they believed in him, and I think they really do, and I think they see him as a very important part of the future.
I remember hearing from team boss Andrea Stella when Dunne did that move at the start of the race in Monaco, which was ill-advised, caused that big pile-up, wasted a big opportunity on a grand stage, and Stella said he thought this could be an important lesson for him, an important day for him to realise where to concede, where the fights are. And I think he channeled that very nicely. He's recovered from that really well in Formula 2, as we say, and he's equipped himself extremely strongly to start with in Formula 1.
Well, that's partly because, you know, if you look at Dunne's career trajectory, I was talking to Warren about this and his dad as well, and for him it's always going to be quite hand to mouth and kind of, you know, he was never sure of his future. He was always fighting to prove himself, and you can kind of see that in the way he races. It's almost as if every race is his last race, and actually part of what McLaren's doing is saying, well, hang on, we really believe in you. You are our long-term future. You don't need to strive like that always.
Well, you mentioned then long-term future, because however good this guy turns out to be, and the evidence so far, we're very impressed, not just with today, but obviously in a sort of more public setting today. There isn't a seat for him at McLaren. So is this someone who could be the long-term future of McLaren, or is it a Gabriel Bortoleto situation, someone who's clearly got F1 potential, but might need to find somewhere else or something else to do in the meantime, because he's doing such a good job, he might not be able to, or might not need to, or be allowed to do the second year of the F2 program that was really set out for him? Absolutely,
it was supposed to be a 2-year program. I think pretty much it's going to be a 1 year now. If he wins the title, obviously he can't come back. Even if he doesn't win the title, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a 1 year. You can't learn much more in Formula 2. I think it's slightly different to Gabriel Bortoleto. You know, Bortoleto was a big talent. I think Dunne's an even bigger talent in McLaren's eyes and in the eyes of the people watching him. So I don't think they're going to want to let go of him. People can say, oh, it's a bad problem to have because you've got these 2 drivers signed up. I think it's a pretty good problem to have this driver, you know, on your books as well.
I think that's what McLaren will think, and a different thing with Bortoleto as well, is he was a driver who, though McLaren saw good progression with him through last year with the work that they were doing, they were ultimately happy to let him go because they didn't have a seat to offer him, and they didn't think he was a driver who would force his way into a Norris-Piastri lineup in the medium or long term. They might feel slightly differently about Dunne. At the moment, Norris and Piastri are performing at a very, very high level, 1 and 2 in the championship, obviously. But when you've got a talent like Dunne, that means that there is pressure from below. But Norris, if there is any pressure on him this weekend, rose to that very well. He did dip a wheel into the gravel after taking the car back early in FP2, but he responded brilliantly. For a driver that wasn't in the car in FP1 to come out the way he did, got to the top of the times pretty early in FP2, to be honest, I think on his 3rd flying lap, and then topped the times by the end of it. How much did Norris need this, given obviously not just what happened in Canada, not just the narrative of the season, but the fact that he'd given up the car in FP1 and was potentially on the back foot this weekend at a track he loves?
Yeah, absolutely. You said he loves this track. You know, he's got a really strong record here. This will be the perfect weekend for him to come back, get some big points on the board. Well, you know, take pole position and take the win, because on the evidence of today, McLaren has the fastest car around here. So Norris is going to be going into tomorrow and Sunday thinking, this is my big chance to hit back. And I guess as always, it's a question of, we've seen the great potential on Friday, we've seen a good feeling behind the wheel. Is that going to continue when it really counts in those final moments in Q3? I guess that's a big question.
We don't want it to be another FP2 session that he's faster than. That's been the pattern so far this year, and then only for it to fade on Saturday, because that has been Norris's big limitation. We've talked about that in another video that we've done that you can check out on the channel. What I would say about the way that Norris went about his FP2, it was very methodical. And McLaren were quite clever. Every time he finished a push lap, they told him to keep pushing into turn 1, and then he did the back off after turn 1. So it meant that every single time he did a push lap, he bought himself an extra go at the first corner. Here, I mean, this is the case at every track where the first corner obviously then builds the rest of the lap, but here it's so confident, so important for that flow. Hitting the brakes, hitting your marks for turn 1, you got that run all the way up the hill. So I thought that was very clever from McLaren. But I think Norris drove well. He looked confident, he looked comfortable. There are upgrades on the McLaren this weekend for both cars, but obviously for Norris in particular, he's still trying to work out how much that upgrade he had in Canada to give him that bit more feedback through the steering wheel, give him a bit more feel for the front axle, actually work. So this is a big weekend in that regard, isn't it? Because if it can't come together here where he's got such a good track record, you might ask, when, you know, how dependable can he be elsewhere? Yeah,
a much more traditional track for him to kind of test it out at. And I guess into turn 1, up the hill into turn 3 at the right-hander, that's all about driver feel, isn't it? So we're really going to see him on the brakes, him turning in. Is the feel going to be there on that final lap in Q3? You know, only time will tell, I guess.
Exactly, and he also knows that there is pressure, not just from teammate Oscar Piastri, who was a little bit off Norris today, and I think he'll be a bit disappointed with that, considering he had FP1 and Lando didn't. But they weren't just, it's not a class of their own. McLaren tend to show a little bit more on Fridays. Norris is very aware of that. He said that this evening as well. And even though Red Bull, for example, were a bit further back come FP2, where Yuki Tsunoda, I think, actually outpaced Max Verstappen, which I think is a little bit more of Yuki showing more of his speed in FP2, which we've seen before, and Verstappen and Red Bull having a slightly tougher day. Norris expects that to change come Saturday. I think we're expecting that as well. Max also has a great track record here.
Always a threat here, right? You can never sleep easy. I think even if McLaren have some kind of pace advantage, they're not safe. The nature of these corners, we know they can cause incidents. We know Max can create something here. So yeah, it's not going to be an easy night's sleep, I don't think, for anybody at McLaren.